Hi folks, we're Taskless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept of tyranny and discuss what does tyranny mean in the modern day. And we can go back to since governments or structures of government and control have existed, then the question of what's tyranny and what different forms of government, should they be oligarchies, monarchies, ruled by simple majority, Republican type structures, or tyrannical, or whatever it might be. These have exercised the minds of people for thousands of years. If we go back to Plato and historians, again, ancient Greek historians like Polybius and Thucydides. We go to the Roman times, Tacitus and the Seneca, Cicero. I mean, the list goes on, Pliny and so on, that have, again, exercised their minds over this question in one way or another. And it comes back to, no matter what the power a government may or may not wield, what restraints upon that power exist, what are the rules that they have to work by. And power with rules and the law, a rule, and that's what the law is, rules, and the Constitution and Bill of Rights, or whatever you want to call it, but restraints on power. Then by extension, whether you have the people vote for their government or don't, if that government is restrained by the law, bear in mind that in a tyranny they can make up some crazy laws, but nonetheless, if they're restrained by law, by courts that can review the laws and so on, are the laws constitutional and so on, then there can be a huge amount of restraint on power. And of course, independent courts are equally essential to this. Now, this is a question that throughout time has never been fully solved. It's still not fully solved today. Look at the way the globalist-controlled Democrat Party in government over the last 4 years has outrageously abused their power. They've ignored the law. The legal department is used as lawfare. They're happily prepared to conjure up bogus charges against their political opponents, to interfere with court proceedings, to stack juries, to fabricate evidence, to go after people legally, again, the lawfare thing. And so, well, if you declare guilty, we'll put you in prison for 12 months, but if you fight us on this, we'll bankrupt you. You'll be ruined for the rest of your life. Giving people those jobs. This is tyranny. This is tyranny. Let's call it what it is. It is tyranny. Now, there are some sort of restrictions, like they have to send you a letter or something saying that you're going to prison. But other than the minor administrative trappings of what appears, the mirage, the delusion of law working as it's supposed to, it's tyranny, pure and simple. And in my view, means that government is acting in an unrestrained manner, or with such limited restraints that it's effectively doing what it wants, without regard to the law, without regard to the rules, without regard to the Constitution, and again, even interfering with the processes, let alone the laws themselves, such as appointing activist judges, activist DAs, jury stacking, and the like. So this is tyranny, and it shouldn't be happening. Now, tyranny is also coming in, again, all globalist inspired and controlled. For example, if somebody complains about mass migration to the West, they can be accused of committing a vague hate crime, and so they can get dragged into court and go to prison. And so there's general insanity in whether you look at Britain or whether you look at Canada, Australia, or the United States. Anywhere, this in New Zealand, it doesn't matter. This sort of nonsense is all over the Western world, and let's be quite clear: it's inspired by and pushed by the globalists, who've made sure there's not a single sovereign Western government left anymore. Germany, the list just goes on. Now, given this is, in my view, at least quite clearly tyranny, let's come back now to the definitions and the various grades of tyranny. When I was looking for a thumbnail for this video, the only tyrant that ever existed in all time apparently is Hitler, which is where's the Stalin, where's the Pol Pot, where's the Chairman Mao, where a host of others throughout time. No, just Hitler. So he's obviously the go-to in the word tyranny. I remember there was a book this is in high school when I think I first doing history class. It was by an English academic called Alan Bullock. I'm going from memory here, and it's called Hitler: A Study in Tyranny, as if he was the only tyrant ever. And I remember reading it as going back to it, I think, in the final year of high school, and looking at it, and I could see the holes in it. There was plenty of propaganda there, and again, the sort of direction was Hitler was the only guy that was ever a tyrant, and of course that's absolute nonsense. Coming back to there was a guy I knew. He was a teenager in Hungary when Hungary was an ally of Germany during World War II, and so there was a lot of German government officials, Nazi officials around in Hungary, and his father was like a local mayor or some city official of some standing, and he was Jewish, so he's Hungarian, he's Jewish. Now, he says he was never frightened or concerned about the Nazis or the German government at the time. They would come around with they would ask his father, and he'd often be there, so he said, and they'd say, look, can you we'd like to round up these Jews and so on. And the fact, no, we need them. This person's the only dentist in the village, or those sorts of things. And he said the Germans never pushed it. They would ask, and quite politely, they didn't push it, didn't kick the door down or something like that. If the father said no, then they just let it go, and off they went, and that was the end of it. Hungary surrendered to the Soviets in later in the war, World War II, and so at that stage the Germans came in and occupied Hungary, but even then, his according to him, again, he's Jewish, for goodness sakes, his father was treated with deference by the German government and the military officials. So these are the things he remembers, or so he explained it to me, that when the Germans officially took over in Hungary, they would sort of issue rules saying, well, these are the rules. As long as you abide by these rules, you won't have a problem with us. So there was no attempt at being arbitrary, as he recalls it. And he didn't like the idea of the Nazis being there. And but he, this is the teenager and his father, but they were quite clear, these are the rules. Now, government, you've been occupied by a military government effectively, so there's no question there's tyrannical issues to consider there. But they had a very clear, these are the rules, and they stuck by them. And he said they weren't arbitrary. They applied those rules quite stringently, but as long as you followed them, you didn't have any problem. Now, he was, of course, still a teenager when the Soviet communists, the Joseph Stalin, the murderous Joseph Stalin regime, they occupied Hungary, again, from a military government perspective. And they were very vague with their rules. They sort of didn't really have many rules. They were quite vague, and they would ask for town hall type meetings where, come on, citizens, gather together and decide on the sort of future you want, and you have your input, and we want to hear from you, and all this sort of stuff. So all the citizens, assuming that that's what it was for. Some of the savvier citizens probably didn't do that. So they went to these meetings with a lot of Soviet communist government officials there, and So they're invited to get up and have their say. No, it's your country. We don't want to tell you what to do. But anyone who spoke out, this is the sort of future we want. This is what we want. We hope that the communists leave at the end of the war and this sort of thing. Then these people were mysteriously disappearing and being whisked away in the middle of the night and never to be seen or heard from again, and sent off to Soviet communist gulags in Siberia and so on. So he says, now this is a Jewish guy. He says he preferred the Nazis because they are quite clear with their rules. So tyranny has certain limitations to it, or it's restricted when the rules, the law, are applied. The communists were quite different. Their aims were ideological, not administrative as the Nazis were. So their aims were ideological, and they were out to protect further, to extend and push the ideology. Now, ideology has no basis in reality, therefore it cannot use laws, rules, and so on, because then it restricts itself, and it wants to have restrictions on you, but not restrictions on itself. So it wants to be able to act arbitrarily, unilaterally, and go in any direction it wants for any reason. Now, this is why when you look at the laws in certainly in the Soviet Union, say before the late 70s, the laws there were very, very much ideological. Yeah, you could go and murder someone, that was no great shakes, but if you complained about the form of government, then you're an enemy of the people and they'd kill you. So tyranny is where any government that's ideological realizes that laws, if it has to abide by the law, abide by the verdicts of independent courts and so on, then it restricts its own capacity to act arbitrarily, unilaterally, which it must have. Tyranny must have the capacity to act unilaterally and arbitrarily. Just decide we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We don't have to confer with anybody, we don't discuss with anybody. We just want to do it, and we don't want laws to get in the way. So you either have to remove the laws or subvert them, or phrase them in such a way that they're so vague that you can interpret them any way you want. You then have the prosecution departments of the justice departments acting also unilaterally and arbitrarily on the basis, again, of ideology. So if somebody commits a murder or savagely brutally assaults somebody and cuts them up with a knife, and then they get community service. But if somebody puts out a social media post that disagrees with mass migration, and they'll go to prison. So we can see that all across the Western world now, again, where there are no sovereign governments, the globalists control everything. Then the law has been removed as a restraint on tyrannical action, or the exercising of power, which we can call tyrannical. And it's interesting to watch. We see it in again, Australia, and particularly the Anglosphere, but all over the Western world. This idea of if there isn't an indigenous native sort of people to use as the wedge issue to humiliate and guilt and shame white people, then they'll simply import a class from anywhere in the third world, bring it in, and then use that to guilt and shame the white people. And this is very much a playbook of the globalists. But the idea of the laws sort of don't matter, and the laws are deliberately vague so they can be interpreted in any way that the tyrannical power wants or intends to use, again, for ideological reasons. So coming back to this Jewish guy in Hungary, and the enormity of this, you may sort of struggle, but he's Jewish. I mean, the Nazis, Hitler. The guy's Jewish, but he prefers the Nazis over the communists. Not because he likes the Nazis, or it's nothing to do with that. His take on it as a teenager, given that his father was a government official, then I suppose the law and clearly documented law and that sort of thing would have been an issue in his family and around his family's dinner table. So that I get. But he prefers the Nazis because they were quite clear in the rules. whereas the Soviet communists, Joseph Stalin, the murderous Joseph Stalin, the laws were vague and deceptive and duplicitous. Yeah, we're your friends. Yeah, come on, come to the town hall meeting, everybody. We love you. And then they systematically kill off anyone who had an opinion they didn't like. The Nazis didn't do that and didn't behave that way. Now, were the Nazis perfect? Well, no, obviously not. But they had a now again, if you look at, say, German society, this is after the Nazis had come to government. Now, if you were a Jewish homosexual gypsy or something, or a lesbian, things wouldn't work out too well. So no one's suggesting this is perfect here, far from it. But the Jewish, lesbian gypsy population of Germany was 1 in 100, not even that. So this idea of that it was a mass, it was attacking the mass. No, it wasn't. Whereas ideological governments, whether it be communist or it is always the majority that is being attacked. Always the majority. Whereas, in the case of the Nazis, it was the 1% that were not doing so good in Germany when the Nazis came to government. So, but the people that talk about the Nazi government, the German government at the time, the National Socialist government, there was no change in how things were done. The law was still respected. An arrest warrant still had to be signed by a judge, and so on. So that didn't change. Now the ideology came in, against, say, Jewish people, gypsies, homosexuals, that sort of thing. So communist revolutionaries. But again, they weren't even 1% of the population. So their rights, and it's let's be clear about this, their rights were not respected, and their legal rights were trampled upon. But the 99%, the law went on as it had been previously. In fact, if anything, the Nazis, because they were sticklers for rules, observed the law probably more stringently than others might, and far more stringently and far more fairly and reasonably than the Soviets did. To the Nazi government, the law was essential. Its administration, its courts, and these sorts of things. To the Soviets and the communists, any ideological government, the law just gets in the way. And that's where we are today in the world. The globalists, and it's an ideological system of government they're imposing without the consent of the people. Remember, the Germans voted for the Nazi government based on that platform of delivering employment and fixing the roads and all that sort of stuff. So the German public supported that, not because of what they did to the Jews or didn't do. It wasn't anything like that. It was support for an effective administration that returned a higher standard of living and gave better facilities and so on to the people. And there was certainly, you could say, there was quite a socialist element about the Nazis in there, but the Nazis were very determined to improve the lives of German citizens, and that was very much a focus of the Nazi policies, which is why they were supported. Now the Soviets, by contrast, or again any ideological based government, cannot live or exist in reality, and therefore it cannot be restrained as it would see it, restrained or restricted in its arbitrary actions by the law and by rules. And that's where we are today with the globalists and their imposition of arbitrary ideological law, which we see in all areas of the practice of law now. Legal students coming out of university are all starry-eyed with this ideological law bullshit of social power and all this sort of crap again, which is very much a globalist device that disenfranchises white people universally. Now we can only hope that the Trump administration will sweep that away with great vigor and gusto, sweep all that away in the United States, and that President Trump will use his administration, as the globalists have used the US administration in the past, to force countries into adopting globalist policies. I hope that and many of us, I think, would hope that President Trump will use the US government now to reverse those things, whether it be in Germany or Britain or Australia or elsewhere. Remember that in order to put globalist policies in place, the US was acting like a thug on the street corner, demanding, effectively, extorting and shaking down other Western countries. Now, you better have lots of mass migration, otherwise we won't trade with you, or we'll slap tariffs on you, or we'll make sure the World Bank doesn't loan you money, or those sorts of things. And I hope President Trump reverses that now, saying if you continue mass migration, we'll slap heavy tariffs on you, that type of thing, because this desperately needs to be reversed. And this ideological government, I would argue tyrannical, must be stopped, in my view. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.